The inconceivable can occur when two men enter the octagon. It reached unprecedented heights when one individual was able to capture and market this unpredictability. In addition to being one of the greatest UFC champions of all time, Anderson Silva is also regarded as one of the most prominent figures in martial arts history. The Brazilian, who was well known for his cunning tactics and brazen fighting style, held a firm grip on the middleweight title in the UFC for 7 years following his victory in his second bout. This is the story of Anderson the Spider Silva. Anderson's story began in 1975, where he was one of his father's 4 children living in Sao Paulo, Brazil. His martial arts journey began as a spectator, watching other kids train since he could not afford to join in. Once his family was able to afford lessons, Anderson didn't look back and would go on to practice in several martial arts from capoeira to Muay Thai. Silva made his professional debut on June 15th in 1997, winning back-to-back fights on the same night. Though he tasted defeat for the first time in his third pro fight, Silva would then go on a 9-fight win streak that would see him leave Brazil behind and make his name fighting in Japan. In the years 2002 to 2003, Silva went 3-1 in the Pride promotion and gave the absolute hardcore fans an appetizer of what was to follow in the coming years. From Pride, he transitioned to the UK promotion Cage Rage, and this is where the Spider really started to emerge as a threat. With 4 wins in Cage Rage, separated by a loss in Pride and a loss via disqualification at Rumble on the Rock 8, he won and defended the Cage Rage middleweight title 3 times. With several impressive finishes along the way, Silva was just beginning to scratch the surface of that iconic style that will never be replicated. On June 8th in 2006, Anderson transitioned into the UFC, where he would make one of the most legendary debut statements the sport has ever seen. Making his octagon debut against fan favorite Chris Liebman, many spectators wouldn't have known who Silva was at the time and wouldn't have given him much of a chance. However, the rare few that had seen the Spider in Cage Rage knew what to expect, and he over-delivered on this potential. In just 49 seconds, Silva dismantled Liebman with relative ease and put the entire UFC on notice. With arguably the fastest arrival ever seen on a large scale in MMA, Silva would fight again in the UFC just 4 months later, competing for the middleweight title. Once again, Silva ripped through the wall of people's expectations, adding another highlight reel finish to his resume by stopping Rich Franklin in 3 minutes. From here, Silva would go on to dominate the 185-pound division with some of the most iconic performances in UFC history. In his world title run, aside from a few fights at light heavyweight, Silva reigns supreme as arguably the best fighter on the planet from 2006 to 2013. Though there were some slight low points, such as his decision win over Talas Leitas and Damian Maia, where he was accused of stalling and coasting, the majority of this run was golden. After winning the title in 2006, Silva produced 6 consecutive finishes, completely separating himself from the rest of the UFC roster. He stopped Nate Marquardt, Travis Lutter, Rich Franklin for a second time, Dan Henderson, James Irvin, and Patrick Cote, with a mix of submissions, punches, and his legendary knee strikes. It was clear that Silva was something special, and he had an aura of invincibility around him best described as he was living and dismantling all of the division's old guard one by one. In August of 2009 at UFC 101, Silva went up to test the waters at light heavyweight after cleaning out his division to take on former champion and Ultimate Fighter winner Forrest Griffin. In one of the most one-sided fights ever seen in the UFC, Silva played with Griffin before Forrest had had enough, waving the fight off just over 3 minutes in. When he returned to middleweight, Silva would approach the biggest rival of his career, serving as a perfect opposite to Silva's quiet and respectful nature. But showmanship persona in the cage, Chael Sonnen, was made for Anderson Silva. A wrestling specialist with a WWE persona to get the fans interested in his fights, Sonnen took every opportunity to insult the Brazilian native, who at the time was seen as unbeatable. With a real tension between Silva and Sonnen during the lead-up to their bout, this one felt different and drummed up a lot of hype going into UFC 117. The story of this fight is one of the most well-known chapters in MMA's history. Sonnen dominated Silva with his wrestling offense and was able to hold him down as the rounds went on and on. With the 5th round in full swing, Sonnen on top of Silva on the ground, the fight outcome was close to inevitable. Less than 2 minutes away from becoming world champion after winning every second previously, Chael got caught in a submission attempt from the Spider, who got the tap and pulled off the biggest come-from-behind victory the sport had ever seen. However, Chael and Anderson's story wasn't over, as they would rematch in July of 2012. Between their 2 fights, Silva reminded everyone that his win over Chael wasn't a fluke. With the best finish of his entire career, Silva shocked the world by front-kicking and knocking out fellow Brazilian icon Vitor Belfort in the first round. A second-round finish of Yushinov Kami led Anderson back to Sonnen, though this time the fight played out in the palm of Silva's hands. Unable to implement his wrestling style as effectively this time around, Sonnen was no match for Anderson in a striking contest, and he was picked apart just like many before him. Silva defended his title once again with a second-round stoppage over his biggest rival. The ending of his chapter with Chael Sonnen would also bookmark the end of his legendary title reign. With one of the most shocking upsets in MMA, Chris Weidman caught Silva with a punch as he was showboating, knocking the great champion out in the second round. 6 months later, in December of 2013, Silva looked to reclaim his world title in an immediate rematch with Weidman. Unfortunately, his chance at redemption was drastically cut short by a horrific leg injury in the second round. With Silva clearly in immense pain and fans forced to turn away, the great reign of the Spider seemed like a thing of the past. From this point on, Silva's leg injury would go on to become a huge turning point in his career in the UFC. He returned to the cage just over a year later in a dream fight with Nick Diaz, which he originally won before the result was overturned to a no contest, with both men failing drug tests for different reasons. Aside from one short-notice fight with Daniel Cormier at light heavyweight, the rest of Silva's fights would see him attempt to compete at the top of the middleweight division. Winning just 1 out of 5, it was a tough watch for fans that remember the old Anderson Silva. That being said, he did have several more iconic nights in the octagon left inside him. A 5-round battle of attrition with Michael Bisping in London and a face-off for the ages with Israel Adesanya in Melbourne showed exactly how much Silva meant to the fans. On November 19th in 2020, just a few weeks after his last UFC loss to Uriah Hall, it was announced that Silva would be leaving the promotion that he had become a star in. Whilst many thought he may retire for good or show up in another cage, the Spider ditched the octagon for a ring and stepped into the world of boxing. With a record of 52-5 and being the son of one of the all-time great boxers, Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. was a very tough opponent for Silva to step in and face. Though Chavez Jr. hasn't lived up to his father's legendary name, he has been in the ring with the likes of Danny Jacobs and Canelo Alvarez. Despite his boxing pedigree and far greater experience, it wasn't enough to stop Anderson Silva from doing the unthinkable, and once again, surprising everybody watching. Silva took to the ring like a natural, beating the former WBC middleweight champion via split decision. As if beating a former world champion boxer wasn't enough, the most recent chapter in Silva's career added an even further level of fan admiration. With Silva successfully stepping into the ring, fans all over the world were able to watch Anderson win again and be on top of the world, giving them their moment to celebrate his legendary legacy instead of having to look back at it from a distance. Another boxing match was arranged shortly after, this time against fellow UFC legend Tito Ortiz. Ortiz was the perfect opponent for Silva to gain another night of pure admiration from the fans, a controversial character who was simply no match for the boxing abilities of the Spider. With all of the Anderson Silva tropes out on display, including a highlight reel first-round finish, it was another night where the only thing anyone could talk about was the greatness of the man himself. After some rough years for Silva fans watching him try but fall short of competing with the top middleweights in the UFC, his experiments in the boxing world gave everyone a feel-good moment, an opportunity to fall in love with watching Anderson Silva all over again, seeing the Spider in his element but not out of his depth. As always, if you guys enjoyed the video, please be sure to let me know by leaving a like and subscribing to our channel. Apart from that, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.